Alright. Hare Krishna. Very happy to be here again in Zagreb. And we're continuing with the reading of our wonderful Srimad Bhagavatam, the chapter where Krishna leaves Hastinapur. And we're at verse number 6 or 7 actually, going on. So I'll just chant the invocation mantra. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Om
Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jai. Jai. All glories to all the Vaishnavas and to Srila Prabhupada. So, I want to read quickly a certain amount, about 10 verses, and then I do want to get to verse 20. Here, I was asking Sundarananda when he said, okay, you have to read from first canto, chapter 10, and I was like, okay. So I looked, and this section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, as I told, let me read to you what I wrote to Sundarananda. But it's relevant. And then when I was washing my hands, actually, I was in the restroom, and I was like, okay, then I have to. Anyway, so this is what I wrote to Sundarananda. I said, because usually here we get sort of I'm used to giving sort of introductory classes and trying to speak really on universal terms, So I'll use the word God much more than Krishna, for example, and trying to elucidate what we believe is already there. It's not like we're making this up, that the Bhagavad Gita has a very universal message. The Srimad Bhagavatam also has a very universal message, and simultaneously it also has a very, very specific message in terms of the identity, the nature of the absolute truth, which the Bhagavad Gita does talk about, but even more so in the Bhagavatam, and even the identity of that Supreme Person. So I wrote to Sundarananda, I was like, these verses, referring to the verses we're reading now, these verses that describe specific leelas. Leelas means in Sanskrit pastimes, the stories of Krishna. So specific leelas of Lord Krishna, I don't see how I can speak on them without establishing the identity of Krishna as the Supreme Person. Is that okay? And so then I was like, yeah, no problem. So, before going into these verses, I think it's important to remember that the Bhagavatam, this book, which we often say has 18,000 verses, but actually has about 14,000, if you actually count them. Still a lot of verses, and it's considered to be, by the Vaishnavas, by the devotees of Krishna, as it's described as the ripened fruit. The text itself describes the Bhagavatam as the ripened fruit of the tree of Vedic knowledge. So imagine you have all the Vedic knowledge, it's a tree, it's all these fruits, and so it's the ripened fruit of all the Vedic knowledge. And the text again and again says that by coming in contact with this text, there's a revolution in consciousness that happens, purification that happens, Therefore it's the most cherished scripture for the monotheistic, branch of the followers of the Vedas. And so this book, which we're reading, makes 2 or 3 really, really courageous or very big claims, and which we cannot avoid in reading these verses, especially. Number 1 is that the absolute truth, aside from being an energy, aside from being omnipresent everywhere, is, according to the text and its ultimate revelation, a Supreme Person. And I say that with a little bit of drama, because for some people who are very much anchored in a non-dualistic paradigm, the idea that the absolute truth, could be a person is worse than, I don't know, insulting the queen. So that's the first claim, that the absolute truth is impersonal, and is localized everywhere, but it also is a person, a supreme person. So that's a big claim. And then the second claim that the text makes is that this supreme person walked on this planet about 5,000 years ago. And that the pages of the Srimad Bhagavatam recount the leelas, as they're called, the pastimes of this supreme person who graced the very planet that he creates. And Christians talk about the descent of Christ. So in the similar way, you have this notion of avatar. Literally it means a divine descent. But in the case of Krishna, the Bhagavatam says that he's avatari, which in Sanskrit means the original, the original person, the source of all the other, the source of all the avatars. So that's a pretty big claim. And so here in this chapter, the narrator is telling us about when that supreme person, as is claimed, by the Bhagavatam, was, after the battlefield of Kurukshetra, was in Hastinapur, assisting to put into his rightful position as the ruler of greater earth, as it's called. One of the 5 heroes of the Mahabharata, one of the brothers of Arjuna, namely Yudhishthir. And here this chapter is describing how, after all that's done, then, Krishna's leaving. And let's see what the text tells us about when Krishna is leaving. So text 7 says, Sri Hari, or Lord Sri Krishna, resided at Hastinapur for a few months to pacify his relatives and please his own sister. Hastinapur is another name for New Delhi. Afterwards, so this idea, can God have a sister? We'll talk about that actually in a few verses when we get to what the ladies of Hastinapur say about Krishna. And that's where I want to kind of, not fast forward too fast, but I don't want to spend too much time before these verses, because these verses in verse 20 and 22, 23, which are spoken by these great aristocratic ladies, are full of philosophy. And that's when we come back to this, sort of a universal definition of God. Not to minimize that we believe that Krishna is that supreme person, and we relish, as we'll see actually, we relish hearing about these stories of Krishna, and devotees of Krishna accept them as significant and real and nectarian to hear. But for us who are sort of beginners in spiritual life, it's always nice to remember the attributes of God. To remind even ourselves that, it's not just the blue boy, it's the blue boy who is the source of everything, and so on. So, text 8. Afterwards, when the Lord asked permission to depart, and the king gave it, the Lord offered his respects to Maharaj Yudhishthir by bowing down at his feet, and the king embraced him. After this, the Lord, being embraced by others and receiving their obeisances, got into his chariot. One point to glean from this is that the Bhagavatam describes that this supreme person comes into this world and acts like an ordinary human being. And that includes, in the context of a very advanced civilization, a pretty strong emphasis on respect and compassion vis-a-vis other persons. So if you're seniors, you go to India today, and you'll still see, especially in Hindu circles, the son or the daughter will greet the grandfather or the grandmother by coming and touching the feet as a sign of respect. And so here you have that supreme person, Krishna, who, even though the Bhagavad Gita, he himself claims, and the Bhagavatam all over the place claims that he's the supreme person, he's the origin of all the universes, he's, that's enough description of a supreme person. He behaves, quote unquote, like an ordinary human being, and therefore, because Yudhishthira is technically older, he offers respects to him. and Yudhishthira embraces him. And then Krishna, receives obeisances and embraces from others who are perhaps quote-unquote junior to him. But in verse 20, in these verses that these ladies speak, they explain about this. So, let's continue then. At that time, Subhadra, Draupadi, Kunti, Uttara, Gandhari, these are great lady saints, Dhritarashtra, Yuyutsu, Kripacharya, Nakula, Sahadev, Bhishma Sen, Dhaumya and Satyavati all nearly fainted because it was impossible for them to bear separation from Lord Krishna. The more we advance spiritually, the more we become attached to God. In the Bhagavad Gita 7 chapter verse 1, right, there's this verse, Maya Saktamana Parta Yogam Yunjan Malashraya. Krishna says, you become attached to me by hearing about me. Therefore, it's so important to hear about God. Therefore, those who are serious about God, even though, Djokovic is playing against Nadal, for example, I didn't know. I'm just guessing. I didn't watch the game. They make it a priority to try to fit in some time during the day. The more, the better, to hear about God. And therefore, in this tradition means, to hear Bhagavad Gita, to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, to hear lectures of some favorite devotee who inspires us. Right? But we're doing it out of duty. We don't have much taste, right? Much attraction, much attachment. But according to these scriptures, the more one advances, the more one actually becomes super attached to God and to hearing about God. And when that is not present, it's like you feel a great separation. And so here, in a sense of a very personal sense, not only are they hearing about God, as we're doing now, but here you have God himself, quote-unquote, physically, and I do say quote-unquote because we believe God's form is spiritual, right? It's 100% spiritual. Our form is material with a spark of spirit inside, and that's who we are. But God's body is completely spiritual. Our body is, this Mexican preparation called chili con carne? Chili with meat. Chili con carne, con with carne. So we are almas or atmas con carne. We are souls with meat. Guess who made up that joke? Who else but Hridayananda Goswami could come up with a joke like that? But God's body is described as Satchit Ananda. So there's no difference between God's body and God's soul. It's one, right? So they have that supreme person in front of them, and he's about to leave. And they all nearly faint because it was impossible for them to bear separation from Lord Krishna. For those who are familiar with the 10th canto of the Bhagavatam, the story of Krishna and the gopis, the cowherd girls, it's described that these cowherd girls have so much attachment to Krishna that when they blink their eye, when they're looking at Krishna, they blink. They curse Lord Brahma, who the Vedas say is the creator of the universe and who creates all physical bodies and every species of life. And you idiot engineer, because you created a body that has to blink. And for that time that we're blinking, that slow motion where we cannot see Krishna, and it's torture. So that's, attachment. And we should, take inventory. Literally, like how much do I have attachment to chant Hare Krishna? How much am I looking forward? Ooh, great. I just woke up. Where are my beads? I can't wait. It's been 7 hours since I couldn't think of, I couldn't chant. It'd be great if most of us were on that level, but if we're honest, speaking for myself, it's not like, oh no, I have to wait on now. The last thing you want is, I have to put my hand into the japa bag and chant. But that's the difference between a liberated soul, according to the Bhagavatam, and a conditioned soul. But we're trying. Next verse. The intelligent, who have understood the Supreme Lord in association with pure devotees and have become freed from bad materialistic association, can never avoid hearing the glories of the Lord, even though they have heard them only once. How then could the Pandavas tolerate his separation? For they had been intimately associated with his person, seeing him face to face, touching him, conversing with him, and sleeping, sitting, and dining with him. And imagine you're doing all that with God, and then he leaves. Interesting point also in this verse about association. Bad materialistic association. One way to say it in Sanskrit is asat sangha. Sangha means association, and sat means truthful or real or good association. And so asat, like ahimsa, you put the word a before and it negates what comes after. So asat sangha means unholy association. So here the Bhagavatam talks about, to become free of asat sangha, materialistic association. So that means, for us, you have to be really careful what you allow to enter your eyes, what you allow to enter your ears, what food you allow to enter into your mouth, what people you allow to be intimate and close with you. Who do you open your heart to? Because there's a mixture of energies and influences, and that unholy association tends to bring you down towards the lower gunas, as we're called in the Bhagavad Gita, the mode of passion and ignorance, which translates into what we would call adharmic behavior, or behavior that is self-destructive in the ultimate sense and doesn't make us happy. It's counterproductive to our upliftment, towards God, and brings us down, right? So here this verse is saying, these people felt great separation. Again, text 13. All their hearts were melting for him on the pot of attraction. They looked at him without blinking their eyes, and they moved hither and thither in perplexity, like, oh no, he's leaving, no, he's leaving, no, he's no. The female relatives, whose eyes were flooded with tears out of anxiety for Krishna, came out of the palace. They could stop their tears only with great difficulty. They feared that tears would cause misfortune at the time of departure. You often hear this, you shouldn't cry when someone's dying because it may be inauspicious for their departure. It's coming from this verse right here. Interesting. Text 15. While the Lord was departing from the palace of Hastinapur, different kinds of drums, like the mridanga, dhola, nagra, dunduri, dundubi, and flutes of different types, the veena, gomukha, and bedi, all sounded together to show him honor. So God is about to leave. Out of a loving desire to see the Lord, the royal ladies of the Kurus got up on top of the palace, smiling with affection and shyness, and they showered, flowers upon the Lord. So this tradition of, showering flowers on the Lord, whether in his deity form, or showering flowers when a very dear devotee is coming or leaving, again, finds its source in this 5,000-year-old text and this passage. So now comes Arjuna on the scene. At that time, Arjuna, the great warrior and conqueror of sleep, another name for Krishna is Gudakesha. Arjuna. Another name for Arjuna is Gudakesha, he who conquers sleep. So, there's not so much we can adjust, because we need, most of us need, at least 5, 6, 7 hours, And if we adjust even a little bit, then our whole body kind of goes haywire. But not to completely ignore this idea that, we should try in a very healthy and holistic and, sustainable, lifelong sustainable way, try to save a little time on sleep so that you can spend more time on Facebook. So you can spend more time on Instagram. At that time, Arjuna, the great warrior and conqueror of sleep, who is the intimate friend of the most beloved Supreme Lord, took up an umbrella which had a handle of jewels and was embroidered with lace and pearls. Uddhava and Satyaki, other great associates of the Lord, began to fan the Lord with decorated fans. And the Lord, as the master of Madhu, who was a great Rakshasa, or a great demon as we would call it, Madhu, that he killed, seated on the scattered flowers, commanded them along the road. It was being heard here and there that the benedictions being paid to Krishna were neither befitting nor unbefitting, because they were all for the absolute truth, who was now playing the part of a human being. So here's we're getting into some philosophy, coming back to the Yudhishthira, he's embracing Krishna, the younger people are offering respects to him. But here it says basically that these benedictions paid to Krishna were neither benefiting or befitting or unbefitting, because they were all for the absolute. So here we're getting this reminder that yes, Krishna was playing the role of the junior to Yudhishthira and senior to the younger brothers of the Pandavas and so on, and touching the feet and allowing, but ultimately he's the absolute truth. And he's playing the part of a human being. He's still a person, but he's playing the part of a human being. And once in a while, or many times, he performs superhuman acts which distinguish him from others, So therefore, to the claim that, we're all God, the Vaishnavas may often say, okay, then if we're all God, then please do something as extraordinary as what Lord Krishna is described in the 10th canto or in the 1st canto as having done. For example, the lifting of the Govardhan hill. This is what devotees of Krishna believe, that this Govardhan hill was personally lifted by Krishna with his little pinky for 7 days, okay? If that's true, then that these are cases where Krishna shows, okay, I'm acting like a human being, but I'm actually unlimitedly powerful, unlimitedly attractive, I'm God, and you're not. You're a part and parcel of me, we have a loving relationship of bhakti, but you're not the Supreme Person, I am. And so, we can ask, okay, if you're God, then lift the Govardhan, lift this chair with your finger for 30 seconds, or show me your universal form. In the Bhagavad Gita at one point, right, Krishna is like, okay, he shows Arjuna everything past, present, future in one place. And text 20. So now the ladies of Hastinapur come, and we'll speak another 10 minutes on this. So, absorbed in thought of the transcendental qualities of the Lord, who is glorified in select poetry, the ladies on the roofs of all the houses of Hastinapur began to talk of him. This talk was more attractive than the hymns of the Vedas. They said, so here are the ladies of Hastinapur, they're seeing Lord Krishna leave, and among themselves they're saying, here he is, the original personality of Godhead. That's a term that Prabhupada coined. Supreme personality of Godhead. Personality of Godhead. It's a very rare term. As a side note, when Prabhupada's translation and commentary to the Bhagavatam was being translated into French, the translators asked Prabhupada when he was still alive, Prabhupada, can we translate Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as Krishna, Dieu, la personne suprême, which means Krishna, God, the Supreme Person. And is that how you translate it in Croatian? Wow, that's the great news. And Prabhupada said yes. And I think that's a great translation. Supreme Personality of Godhead, even in English, like what? Like it's a very, for those who are fluent in English, it's a term that you never hear. So, anyway, just to explain that term. So here he is, they say, the original personality of Godhead, as we definitely remember him. And here they go into philosophy. So here we're going back to universal principles of what the Bhagavatam describes that Supreme Person as. What is God? He alone existed before the manifested creation of the modes of nature. So you have these 3 gunas, and Krishna himself says that he is above these modes, right? As a matter of fact, he says, one who takes shelter of me, if you take shelter of Krishna, if you take shelter of me, he says, this divine nature is made of these 3 gunas, and it's duratyaya, it's super difficult to overcome. Our material conditioning is super difficult to overcome. But, he says, but those who have taken shelter of me, they easily cross beyond it. So how can someone claim that if you surrender to me, you'll cross the three modes if he himself is not at least above these modes? And here they're claiming that he's at the source of these modes. And in him only, they say, because he is the Supreme Lord, all living beings merge as if sleeping at night, their energy suspended. So here we could refer to the end of, the material world is created and annihilated or reabsorbed. Mahavir, the first expansion of God, is this, gigantic universal form, and out of his pores of his skin, the Bhagavatam describes, when he breathes out, all these billions of universes are coming out of his pores, and when he breathes back in, all the universes are also reabsorbed in him. And so, interestingly, the universes that come out first are the universes that last the longest, are the longest lasting universes, because they go out the furthest away, let's say, from the body of God. And by the time they come back, so those who come out at the very end of his breath are the first ones to come back in, so their duration of existence is also very short. Our universe, according to the Bhagavatam, is one of the, if not the smallest, or one of the smallest universes. Therefore, Brahma only has 4 heads. Right? According to the size of the universe, that demiurge engineer that the gopis, you idiots, you make blinking eyes, has either 4 heads or 5 or more heads. I was hearing, who was saying? Somebody was saying, in Christianity, the Bible makes a lot of very incredible claims. And I was like, sorry, but the Bhagavatam makes some pretty crazy claims too. So the Lord reabsorbs all. So in each universe there's souls who are there, and as long as the soul does not want to turn his face towards God, then that soul just keeps reincarnating, body after body after body. The scriptures say body after body after body after body, and that takes time. And then a soul can, in effect, reincarnate so long that that soul reincarnates in billions of bodies, that the whole duration of a universe. And by the end of that manifestation of the universe, before it gets completely reabsorbed in the body of God, if that soul still has a desire of independence from God, then what happens is that he gets reabsorbed in the body of God for a long time until he breathes out again, and then when that universe is manifest again, it's like you get back to business and trying to enjoy this material world. And so that soul can again reincarnate for billions, trillions of lifetimes during the duration of an entire other universe. In other words, a soul can be in this material world for a super, super long time, for many manifestations and unmanifestations. Maybe here it's appropriate to quote Buddha, who supposedly said that every soul has been every other soul's best friend, worst enemy, mother, father, son, because you have so many lifetimes that you end up playing the role of the significant other or enemy of every other soul, which is a mathematical calculation. As a matter of fact, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, the intricacies of karma are very difficult to understand. Very interesting verse. I got that from Indradumna Swami once. I had read that verse many times, but sometimes you read a verse and it doesn't register until some devotee says it, and you're like, oh wow. So that I have to thank him for that verse, so to speak. For highlighting that verse. That the intricacies of karma, in other words, how many lifetimes, is it a reaction from this lifetime or from 5,000 lifetimes? And it's just too complex. It's too complex. Text 22, so they're still talking. The personality of Godhead, again desiring to give names and forms to his parts and parcels, the living entities, placed them under the guidance of material nature. So again, you've got these souls who are reabsorbed, they still have a desire, so God's like, okay, sorry, even after so long, you still desire independence, so then I'll facilitate that independence, And so again, this verse says, then he gives them by, via Mother Nature, again, physical bodies like we have. Basically, machines through which we enjoy the world, right? Place them under the guidance of material nature. By his own potency, material nature is empowered to recreate. And finally, the last verse, 10:23. Well, there's two more actually. Well, there's more. I'll just read one more. So 23. Here is the same Supreme Personality of Godhead, whose transcendental form is experienced by the great devotees who are completely cleansed of material consciousness by dint, that means because of, or by what? Rigid devotional service and full control of the life and senses. And that is the only way to purify existence. So here these ladies of Hastinapur, they're claiming, okay, here's the Supreme Person, here's God, and then they give the method by which to realize God. And they echo the words of that Supreme Person in Bhagavad Gita, 18th chapter, the super important verse, Bhakti Mam Avijanati, 1855. You should learn this verse, 1855, where Krishna himself, you can learn that verse if you wish. Krishna says, one can understand me as that Supreme Person only by bhakti, only by devotional service. So God is understood by bhakti and not by other means. So what are the other means? Well, one of them is by, philosophizing. God could be like this, God could be like that, and often concluding we are all God. Licking the bottle of a honey jar. You're never going to taste it. And you're never going to experience the presence of God in your life. But if you accept to engage in bhakti, in devotion, which includes not losing your intelligence and becoming a blind follower, but it does involve a submission of heart, an acceptance that I am not supreme and I have a supreme master who loves me, who's my best friend, who, has my best interest eternally, in his first priority, but of whom I'm a servant. And that takes a lot of adjustment for the ego, to live a life as a servant of God. A lot of us don't want to do that at all, But that first step, that bhakti, that acceptance, okay, you know what? I'll theoretically accept that there's a Supreme Person, and I want to, and I want to serve Him. And by serving Him and His servants, then He will reveal Himself to me. And that's what Krishna says. And then the ladies of Hastinapur are saying the same thing, right? That form of the Lord is experienced by great devotees, right? By dint of rigid devotional service. That means, we have to take our spiritual lives seriously. That means we have to take our sadhana seriously. We have to take our spiritual lives seriously. So for us, who are followers of Prabhupada, it means chanting, the Maha Mantra. Yes, our spiritual practice, a spiritual life, which means, spiritual practice. So specifically, we accept that the main process for this age of Kali in which we live in is the chanting of God's name on a regular basis, in group when we come together and sing together, and also individually, with a rosary or a digital tally counter or whatever, chanting and making a decision to chant every day X amount of holy names of God. Specifically, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So you have to do that. You have to make it, because Croatia in one way is a very pleasant place to live, but the risk is to become a little lazy with the spiritual practice, especially if you're living in Split, right? But you can't have amazing realizations of God and at the same time sort of be very or too much nonchalant about your spiritual practice. That spiritual practice, that morning time, you have to take it seriously. You have to really invest in. But the good thing is that when you invest in chanting the holy name and again, reading the Bhagavatam and stuff, you feel sad. You feel even more happy anyway. Spiritually, you get that spiritual happiness. So it's not like you lose in that investment. You actually you win in that investment. But you have to discipline yourself to do it. Because Krishna says, that's the way you can know me. That's the way you can know me. And then it's just, you don't know Him once, you know Him regularly. Like it's a relationship. So you continue to put effort, and Krishna will continue revealing himself to you. And so from day to day, you're living in a constant revelation, a gradual revelation from God and His greatness, and you can, and that carries you until your last breath, through the ups and downs of life. But you have to do your part of the contract, so to speak, and that is to take your spiritual life, your spiritual practice seriously. As the queens, the aristocratic ladies of Hastinapur are saying, are claiming that's the way to do it. So we have to continue just what we're doing and do it better and do it more humbly, and try to, and just try to improve the quality of our spiritual practice. And if we do that, then we will be great examples in Zagreb city or in Croatia in general as people who are living in the world and who are part of the world and part of modern society with all its greatness and all its madness, but who are at the same time kind of not of this world, and who have that extra something which is visible but at the same time unpalatable, and that comes from our relationship with Krishna, which we are nourishing on a daily basis by chanting Krishna's holy name and by reading and hearing about him, in the sangha, in the satsanga of his devotees. So, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Srimad Bhagavatam, Tijai, as we say, all glories to the Srimad Bhagavatam. Hare Krishna.
There's some question.
Are there any questions?